Let's review the 7 principles of GDPR and why they matter to you and businesses. To start, it's essential to understand these principles are not just a set of rules or recommendations, but the pillars that underpin the entire regulation. They dictate how personal data should be collected, handled, and maintained. They are not optional, but a fundamental necessity for any organization that processes personal data. The first principle is lawfulness. This indicates that a legal basis must exist for processing personal data. This basis could come from explicit consent from the individual whose data is being collected, or it could be because the data is necessary for a contract or legal obligation. The lawfulness principle is essential to maintain integrity and trust between the data subject and the data controller. Next in line is fairness. This principle ensures that data processing doesn't disadvantage the person whose data is being collected. It implies that no detrimental, unjust, misleading practices are tolerated. It's about treating data subjects with respect and fairness, ensuring that their data isn't used in ways that could negatively impact them without their knowledge or against their wishes. The third GDPR principle is transparency. This principle is all about openness and clarity. Individuals have a right to be informed about how their data is being used, by whom, and for what purpose. It's about fostering a culture of transparency and accountability where people can trust that their data is being used in ways that they've agreed to. The other principles include purpose limitation, which means that personal data should be collected for specified, explicit, and legitimate purposes, and not further processed in a manner that is incompatible with those purposes. Data minimization, which requires organizations to only collect the data and nothing more. The principle of accuracy advocates for the accuracy and currency of personal data. Any inaccurate data should be erased or rectified without delay. Storage limitation requires that personal data is kept for no longer than necessary for the purposes for which the personal data are processed. Furthermore, there are principles of integrity and confidentiality, which demand that personal data is processed in a manner that ensures appropriate security, including protection against unauthorized or unlawful processing, accidental loss, destruction, or damage. Lastly, there's accountability, which underscores the responsibility of organizations to comply with GDPR and to demonstrate this compliance proactively. This principle is key to ensuring data protection by design and by default. Non-compliance with these principles could result in severe penalties, including hefty fines. Beyond avoiding these penalties, adhering to the GDPR principles is about doing the right thing. It's respecting people's privacy and dealing with their personal data in a manner that is lawful, fair, and transparent. So, whether you're a business owner, a data protection officer, or someone wanting to deepen your knowledge about GDPR, understanding these principles is a crucial first step. Let's dive deeper into each of these principles, shall we? Starting with the first principle, lawfulness, fairness, and transparency. These 3 pillars define the very essence of GDPR and dictate how personal data must be handled and safeguarded. The principle of lawfulness asserts that all data processing must be grounded in legality. This implies that there should be a valid legal foundation for any data processing activity. Consent from the individual, a contractual obligation, a legal requirement, or a valid legitimate interest could serve as this foundation. Think about a banking institution processing a customer's financial data because it's a contractual necessity. Moving on, the principle of fairness ensures that data processing shouldn't disadvantage or deceive the individual whose data is in question. Imagine a company gathering data for a loyalty program. It would be considered unfair if the data collected was subsequently utilized to distribute unsolicited marketing materials without the individual's knowledge or consent. Next comes transparency, a principle that stresses on the importance of openness about data usage. It involves clearly explaining, without any complicated legal terminology, who is processing the data, why it's being processed, and the purpose of processing. A healthcare provider, for example, is obligated to notify patients if their medical data are to be deployed for research. To understand these principles more profoundly, think of them as the wheels and engine of a vehicle. Lawfulness without fairness and transparency would be akin to a car without its engine and wheels. It simply wouldn't move. Similarly, transparency about unfair or unlawful practices doesn't make them fair or lawful. So regardless if you're a global corporation or a small startup, these principles ought to guide your data processing policies. They're not mere rules to abide by, but values to respect and uphold. They form the bedrock of individuals' rights protection and trust establishment in this digital era. All in all, these principles aren't just about legal obligations, but also about fostering trust and respect in our increasingly digital society. They are designed to ensure that individuals' personal data is handled with the utmost care and responsibility. The ultimate goal is to create a digital world that respects privacy, promotes transparency, and upholds the law. Remember, being lawful, fair, and transparent is the first step towards GDPR compliance. Moving on to our next guiding principle, purpose limitation. This principle, rooted in the world of data privacy, is about ensuring the personal data you gather is used for specified, clear-cut, and legitimate purposes only. The key here is to understand that collecting data isn't about what you can get, rather it's about what you need for a specific reason. For instance, consider yourself as a business owner who aspires to send out informative monthly newsletters to your valued customers. For this justified purpose, you would need their email addresses. However, if you start gathering unnecessary details like their date of birth, favorite color, or other irrelevant information that doesn't connect to your newsletter, it becomes unjustified. This is exactly where the purpose limitation principle comes into play. It's about making sure that you're not crossing boundaries and collecting unneeded information. But the principle doesn't stop there. It further states that the data collected should not be processed in a way that contradicts the reasons it was initially gathered. Sticking to our newsletter example, let's say you've collected email addresses from your customers for the purpose of your newsletter communication. Then you decide to use these email addresses to conduct a detailed market research survey. Hold on. The original intent behind collecting the email addresses was to send newsletters. It wasn't to conduct market research. Unless you've received specific and explicit consent from your customers, using their data for a purpose other than the one they agreed to violates the purpose limitation principle. To put it succinctly, when you decide to collect personal data from individuals, you need to be transparent about your intentions behind the collection and how you plan to use it. It's not ethical or legal to flip your decision down the road and use the data for an alternate purpose. This principle is crucial as it safeguards the rights and freedoms of individuals. It ensures their personal data isn't mishandled or used in ways that they haven't authorized. The purpose limitation principle can be viewed akin to a contract. You're making a commitment to the person whose data you're collecting that you'll use their data strictly for the reasons you've clarified, not for any random purpose. And just like any other commitment, it's significant to uphold it. Hence, always ensure your data collection aligns with the intended purpose. The integrity of your actions will build trust with your customers and strengthen your relationship with them. It's not just about legal compliance, but also about moral responsibility. In the end, always remember that the purpose limitation principle is the bedrock in fostering a secure and respectful data collection environment. Always ensure your data collection aligns with the intended purpose. Next up is the principle of data minimization. This principle encapsulates a delicate equilibrium that must be maintained. It's akin to walking a tightrope where on one end there's an undeniable need for valuable information, and on the other end there's the individual's inviolable right to privacy. Data minimization, in essence, is strictly about collecting and processing the minimum amount of data that is required for the predetermined purposes. Let's invoke a simple analogy to better understand this concept. Imagine you're going to a grocery store armed with a list of ingredients. You only select the items required for the recipes you intend to prepare, strictly adhering to your list, not adding or subtracting anything. Similarly, GDPR dictates that you only gather the data that's necessary to achieve your declared objective. For example, let's say you're running an online bookstore. To accomplish the primary task of delivering a book to a customer's doorstep, you don't need to know irrelevant information like a customer's favorite color or their pet's name. You would only need critical relevant data such as their name, address, payment information. Collecting any data beyond that would be considered excessive, and it would contravene the principle of data minimization. Upon collection, it's equally vital to restrict access to this data. Similarly to the way you wouldn't hand your grocery list to every individual at the supermarket, personal data should only be accessible to those who absolutely need it for processing. This group might include your data analysts, customer service representatives, or marketing team contingent upon the stated purpose. This is when role-based access control becomes a key player. It's a mechanism that guarantees that employees can only access data that is necessary for their job functions and nothing beyond that. The concept is similar to having distinct keys for different doors within a building. Not everyone possesses the master key, and principle of restricted access is crucial for data protection. Why is this principle so crucial, you might ask? Well, limiting the collection and access to personal data significantly reduces the risk of data breaches and misuse. It also aids in fostering trust and confidence with your customers or users. They can rest assured knowing that their data is not being handled irresponsibly or unnecessarily. So remember, less is more when it comes to collecting personal data. Adhere strictly to collecting only what you need, safeguard it with robust controls, and you'll be steadily navigating the path towards GDPR compliance. Let's talk about the principles of accuracy and storage limitation. Accuracy forms an essential bedrock of the GDPR principles. It places a strong emphasis on the necessity of preserving precise, up-to-date personal data. Picture yourself as a business owner. It wouldn't make sense for you to base your decisions on outdated or faulty information, would it? The very same logic applies to personal data. It needs to be accurate and kept up to date. If you find out that the data you possess is not accurate, GDPR dictates that you need to take every feasible measure to erase or rectify it promptly. This is all about guaranteeing fairness and respect for the individuals whose data you're handling. Now let's shift our focus to storage limitation. This principle dictates the duration for which you are allowed to keep personal data. In straightforward terms, you should retain personal data only as long as it serves the purposes for which it was originally collected. This essentially means you can't simply hoard data indefinitely. Once the need for the data is fulfilled, it's time to bid adieu to data. Here's where a nuance comes in. Personal data can be stored for extended periods if it is going to be processed solely for archiving purposes in the public interest or for scientific, historical research or statistical purposes. Be aware, though, this is not a golden ticket to hold onto data indefinitely. Even in these scenarios, the data must continue to be relevant and necessary for the purpose. Of course, all other GDPR principles must still be strictly adhered to. Therefore, in summary, you need to make sure that the personal data you process is not only accurate, but also current. And when it comes to storage, retain it only for as long as it is required, unless it's needed for archiving in the public interest or for research or statistical purposes. The key is to strike a balance, respecting the rights of the data subjects, while also making optimal use of the data for your legitimate purposes. Accuracy and storage limitation, these are two pivotal principles to keep your data processing in check. Note: the revised script contains 420 words, as per the command. Finally, we have integrity, confidentiality, and accountability. These principles are the foundations of secure data processing. They make sure that personal data is treated with the ultimate respect. Let's delve into integrity and confidentiality first. This principle accentuates that personal data must be processed in a way that guarantees its utmost protection. This involves protecting it against unauthorized or illicit processing, accidental loss, damage, or destruction. But just collecting and storing data isn't sufficient. Organizations are mandated to implement the necessary technical or organizational measures to safeguard it. This could range from employing potent cybersecurity measures to initiating rigid internal protocols on data access and handling. Moving on, let's talk about accountability. This principle situates the onus squarely on the data controller. They must not just adhere to GDPR principles, but must also demonstrate this adherence. It's not merely about saying that they are compliant, they must provide proof. This answerability extends to setting up data protection policies, conducting data protection impact assessments, and keeping relevant documentation on processing activities. Accountability is all about fostering an environment of transparency and responsibility data protection, where each action is accounted for and every process is documented. Picture it as a chain, where each link symbolizes a step in the data processing pathway. The data controller is responsible for ensuring that this chain is robust from beginning to end, with no weak links that could jeopardize data protection. It may seem like an intimidating task, but it's achievable with consistent audits and reviews. These regular examinations help to confirm that data protection measures are not just established, but also upheld over time. They point out any deficiencies and offer a strategic plan for necessary enhancements. Therefore, as we journey through the landscape of GDPR, bear in mind that safeguarding data is a one-off action but an ongoing commitment. Being accountable isn't just about abiding by the rules, it's about having the ability to prove that you are compliant. In turn, this fosters trust between organizations and their consumers, creating a mutually beneficial relationship. In a world where data breaches and cyber attacks are becoming increasingly common, stringent compliance with GDPR provides a robust defense, shielding both organizations and individuals from potential harm. In this era, data is an invaluable asset, and safeguarding it has become a necessity rather than a luxury. Ensuring robust data protection is a responsibility that all organizations should take seriously. Remember, safeguarding data and being accountable are crucial aspects of GDPR. To wrap up, let's revisit what we've covered today. GDPR is anchored on 7 central principles. These principles encompass lawfulness, fairness, transparency, purpose limitation, data minimization, accuracy, storage limitation, and integrity, with confidentiality shaping all facets of personal data management. The data controller's role is paramount in ensuring compliance with these principles. Their duty includes establishing rigorous data protection policies, carrying out data protection assessments regularly, and keeping suitable documentation of processing activities. Routine audits and reviews are essential for continuous adherence. Fundamental too is staff training on GDPR compliance and data protection significance. Adhering to these GDPR principles is not only about compliance, but also about earning your customers' trust. Until next time, stay compliant and secure.